Good morning, everyone. This is my third study and the last of our presentations here at this camp meeting. So let's start with a word of prayer. Our loving God in heaven, we so appreciate this time we've been able to spend together. We recognize and thank you for your presence. We know that you are leading us with the wisdom from on high. And there are still more discussions and fellowship to be had. We do ask for a blessing for this final study, that it not leave anybody in confusion, but that we can clarify some points. So please help us to that end, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. So I've received a question, and I thought that would be a good place to start this morning. Can you clarify or elaborate on Daniel 11:16? '63 BC and Sunday law. On the geography of Pompey conquering the East. Over the years, I've heard many people say, and you may feel the same way as well, that you hated history in school, but history is much more interesting now. History becomes exciting because we can see a purpose in it. But I think we should also feel the same way about geography. Geography plays an important part in understanding Bible prophecy. And a really good tool for that is just an atlas or Google. When you hear of a particular name or nation in history, to not only place them in time, but to place them in geography. It's like, when the Ukraine war started, we all went to the news sources and found out where it was, the nations that are surrounding it, and it helps you get out of the bubble that we tend to live in. When you recognize and understand other countries and people in different places of the world. So I just want to encourage you to research names and places. So when we consider Daniel 11, and this will be a simplified drawing. You've got the Mediterranean Sea, and you've got the deserts of Arabia. They're meant to be sand dunes. And in the middle of that is the glorious land. We used the word yesterday, coal Syria. And you may also see the word Levant. When you read Daniel and Revelation by R.I. Smith. I think I've lost my translator. So we know that Alexander the Great comes from Greece. And Daniel 11 is going to show us that his empire was divided into 4 parts. So Greece is over in the west. West of the glorious land. And Alexander's going to conquer a vast area. And how does he do it? How does Daniel 7 tell us that Alexander conquers? Like a Daniel 7, how does Alexander the Great conquer? What animal? That's Daniel 8, but that's not bad answer. How about a leopard? And what's a characteristic of a leopard? Very fast, right? So the he-goat was also very fast. So when Alexander heads which direction? He's going to start by going east. He's going to conquer all this area very quickly. And what doesn't he stop to do? Organize it. Doesn't leave a successor. Doesn't stop to organize the nations or set up new governments in the nations that he's conquered. And we know only too well the result of that when he dies. It's going to divide up into a lot of generals. And then into 4, and then into 2. So we could call the north here, we'll call it Asia Minor. It also includes Macedon. and that's in the north. And over in the east, we could go Iran and Iraq. But the territories are bigger than that. It's just giving us modern day equivalents. And the south is easy, it's Egypt. And so in Daniel 11 verse 5, we see that gives us the point where we're left with two generals. Ptolemy's got the south, and Seleucus has the great dominion of the north. It's great because it's not just the north, it's the east, the north, and the west. That's Seleucus. But over time, that Seleucid empire is going to decrease. And by the time we get to verse 16, when Pompey is heading east, the Seleucid Empire is really just in this area here. So where's Pompey come from? He's come from the west. So Rome is just more west than Greece. So the majority of Rome's conquests are going to be east of Rome. Now, Pompey's a young general. His first military successes are in Africa. He's going to do so well that his army is going to love him. And they're going to call him Pompey the Great, after Alexander, his hero. And what will distinguish Pompey from Alexander is that as he goes east, he's going to set up governments and institutions that will not break down so easily when he leaves. He's going to organize his conquered territories. The first thing, so the movers and shakers back in Rome, they're a little wary of Pompey. So they kind of send him away to do some odd jobs. And the first thing they ask him to do is, can you take care of the pirates out here in the Mediterranean Sea? He's a brilliant general. And he does that in 3 months. The pirates are a huge problem to Rome because they stop the trade ships going from Egypt. A huge effect on their economy. So when he captures these pirates, there's lots of them, he doesn't kill them. You know, like any captured enemy, they're saying, oh, we've got wife and kids, don't kill us. And what Pompey does is he resettles them back in Italy, on the Italian peninsula. Puts them in villages and towns that are maybe underpopulated. And says, get jobs, you know, farm, make a proper living for yourselves. And not only does that benefit Rome economically, you've got a whole heap of people that are become very loyal to Pompey. And that's the strategy he's going to use as he goes east. So after dealing with the pirates, he's going to go east right over up into this territory here. And he's going to conquer, but he's how did Jones say it in the book, the history book we read? He's going to set people free from their terrible kings and rulers. And he's going to let them, under the umbrella of Rome, govern themselves. But they're under the control of Rome, but they're also loyal to Rome. One of the people up here is called Mithridates. And once he does that, he's heading back west to Rome. And on his way back, he's going to stop here in the north. Remember, north of the Glorious Land. And this is Syria. And this is the very last of the Seleucid Empire. It's contracted so much that it's just holds this area here, no longer that great dominion that it had in the beginning. So what happened to the rest of the Seleucid Empire? Over here are some other people called the Parthians. The Seleucids didn't just fall to Rome, they also fell to the Parthians. And Rome and Parthia are going to be rivals for the whole of the Roman history. Rome never is able to deal with Parthia. But they are able to set up this buffer zone, a sphere of influence, between them and Parthia. That's important to understand because often we think that these world empires actually occupied the whole world. You know, if you see a map of ancient Babylon, it's not very big, really. And while Rome's empire was a lot larger, there were still other nations that it never really conquered. And that were equal rivals. But they don't affect us so much when it comes to Bible prophecy. At least in this time. It may become important later. And so when we talk about Pompey heading east, everything is east of Rome at this stage. So Pompey's going to deal with the pirates, then he's going to deal with all of this eastern territory. And in 64 BC, he's going to annex Syria. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back to the line that we draw. And we've got 64 BC. And we mark that as Syria. And why is that prophetically significant? Because Pompey conquers the king of the north. And becomes the king of the north. Then stands in the glorious land. And then we'll go 31 Egypt. Okay, so when we went to Revelation 12, we marked that woman of Revelation 12 where? 4 BC. So we're going to mark the woman here. And where are we going to mark the dragon? Did we mark the dragon? Before 4 BC. So this dragon is going to stand before the woman. And to devour that child as soon as it's born in 4 BC. And the tail of this dragon takes us to where? So what must we have in 63 BC? A woman, but in a different phase of history. And what would be the difference between the two women?
Who is the bed? That woman?
One with the sun and one without the sun. Remember, what's that moon represent? We said the Old Testament, we could say Mosaic dispensation. All the types, all the truth that the church had been given when it came, after it came out of Egypt. But it's yet to experience the full light of the gospel. All those types were preparing and pointing to 4 BC and onwards. And this woman is organized. And this is where the problem was, in its organization. And what's the tail of that dragon going to do? Start breaking down the organization of that church. Three parts: kings, priests, Sanhedrin. First part that has to go is the kings. Okay, so we can see the dragon at work here in 63 BC. And we mark that work as being done by Pompey. But the dragon is, in a secondary sense, pagan Rome. Was pagan Rome always a dragon? What do you think? Was pagan Rome always a dragon? Did it always want to devour and tread down people? What did we read yesterday about the Battle of Pydna? 168 BC. Rome versus Macedon. The historian said the beginnings of Rome were gentle and equitable. And we would use different word for that. We'd use the words of Revelation 13. Hosea says lamb-like. So Rome is going to make a change. When would we mark when Rome makes that change? When it becomes the king of the north. So what was so different about this conquest of Syria by Pompey? So as I said earlier, the people back in Rome were a little worried about Pompey. Prior to Caesar Augustus, Rome had no national army. Every general had their own army. So it was Pompey's army, Julius Caesar's army, Sulla's army. So they weren't paid by Rome. They weren't hired by Rome. It was your general who hired you and paid you. And if they were a good general, they paid you well, which meant you had to win. Because that's where the riches, the wealth comes from. Pompey had a good army and they loved him. And when Pompey took Syria that the jealousies and the infightings and the intrigues back in Rome really exacerbated. The annexation of Syria opened up to Rome great wealth and resources. And that's going to intensify the political rivalries back in Rome. Cleaning up the pirates, yep, that was good. What he did over in the Far East, yeah, but that was a long way away. But the annexation of Syria is going to impact Rome in a much greater degree. Because Syria is rich in trade and resources. It's a part of a vital trade route. And so we're going to see great rivalries between three particular generals. So we've got Pompey, who's has great military might. Julius Caesar, who's a brilliant political strategist. And another man called Crassus. And he's the richest man in all of Rome. He has wealth and influence. And in 60 BC, 60 to 59 BC, they're going to make this kind of secret alliance. They distrust each other so much. They did, you've heard the saying, keep your friends close, keep your enemies even closer. They organize what is the first triumvirate, where they'll rule Rome together, and as it's an alliance. And this really starts from 64 BC. That's going to initiate that. That triumvirate is going to break down after a few years. Crassus will die, and then Pompey and Julius will be at each other's throats. And Rome will break. Rome's going to break down into civil war. The last of that civil war is the Battle of Actium. Sometimes we think it's just Rome versus Egypt, but actually it was a civil war. So 64 BC marks the beginning of the breakdown of the Republic. '31 BC will be the beginning of the empire. So from 64 to 31 is the end of the Republic, the Roman Republic, and then 31 onwards is the rise of the Roman Empire under Caesar Augustus. Okay, so we can go back into Revelation 12. And we can mark that dragon as the king of the north, beginning in 64 BC. The king of the north is going to have a direct effect on the glorious land. Now, remember, what are the names of these two phases of the church? So we can call that church Laodicea. We call this church Ephesus. So another point to note with 64 BC, if you remember, we go back to 168 BC. We had the Battle of Pydna, and that's going to be Rome versus Rome conquers Macedon. And that ambassador from Rome is going to turn up in Egypt and tell the king of the north to go back home. That ambassador did that because of the power of the Senate. The Senate was the powerful body that spoke with authority. What 64 BC is going to mark is the power of the generals. The power of the Senate will decrease, the power of the generals is increasing. Pompey and Julius Caesar being the primary ones. So we're going to go from the power of the Senate to the power of generals. And what makes the empire so great under Caesar Augustus when he wins the Battle of Actium in 31 BC is he's going to nationalize the army. So the army will be of Rome, not the armies under a particular general. Right, so basically the system we would see today. Okay, so one of the things we did from Revelation 12, when we noted that it was the Pompey that was the figure of the Sunday law of that time period. Is we compared Pompey with QFMG. Quintus Fabius Maximus Scourges. And what was the comparison? Yeah, so this Pompey is Oscan for fifth. Quintus is Latin for fifth. So that's an interesting comparison, but there are others. I'm just going to draw that the other way around. You may remember one of the characteristics of QFMG. So I'm talking about the man living 200 years before Pompey. He did something. He built something for the first time. Does anybody remember what this man built? No, that's all right. There's been lots of studies, lots of water gone under the bridge. He built the first temple of Venus. Do you remember that? Venus obsequens. It means compliant or obedient. And does anybody remember how he did that? He had to raise the money. He fined the wealthiest women in Rome for adultery. He raised the money by accusing wealthy Roman women of sexual promiscuity. Nobody knows if they ever did that or not. But why did he do that? What was his nickname? Maximus Gurges. And he earned that by being what? What kind of a man was he? We'd say he was a pig of a man. You've heard that saying before. Unrestrained. A glutton. Did what he wanted. Now he wants to change. He wants to be respected. He's going to be a politician. So invoking Venus was political propaganda to say, I'm a changed man. I'm no longer Maximus Gurges. I'm going to be a good politician. So you've got all this political intrigue going on in Rome after 64 BC. And even though they've formed this alliance, you've got Julius Caesar and Pompey battling behind the scenes. How are they going to earn the respect of the people? Pompey's going to build a temple. This one's going to be to Venus Victrix. Because he's going to say, Venus gave me the victory. My military might is because of divine power. So who was Venus? So she was a god, a Roman mythology god, who had a son, and out of this son, Aegeus, was born Romulus and Remus. And Romulus and Remus were the founders of Rome. Built the city on the 7 hills on the River Tiber. So the Romans trace their history back to the god Venus. And she has a very broad meanings for them. She's a sort of the goddess of lots of things. Wealth, success. So we've got this rivalry between Pompey and Julius Caesar. And so Julius Caesar, he's going to build a temple. And he's built a temple to Venus genetics. So while Pompey is saying that Venus has given me the victory, what's Julius Caesar saying? I'm a direct descendant of Venus. I have the divine right to rule because I can trace my bloodline right back to Venus. So Venus was used as propaganda for the divine right to rule. Augustus Caesar is going to even amplify that further. And he's just going to combine the lot. So if we were to compare ancient Rome with modern Rome, secular scholars recognize that the USA doesn't have a female myth figure. But they do have something very similar. What Venus was to ancient Rome, manifest destiny is to modern Rome. And what is manifest destiny? It is that divine right to rule. Sorry, excuse me. It used to be easy, but someone told me my passwords had to be bigger. Okay, so the divine right to rule was this concept that arose out of the USA in the 1850s. That white Americans had the divine right to settle right across the continent. From sea to shining sea. So Venus was justification to the Romans to expand their territory. Manifest destiny is the justification for the US to expand its territory. Venus was the reason for their national greatness. And that's what manifest destiny did for the United States. But as we can see in the history of ancient Rome, it was aggressive policies that were used to acquire that territory. And so that is also attributed to manifest destiny. This isn't, I'm not going to take the time to review the Monroe Doctrine. So it was Elder Test that brought manifest destiny and the Monroe Doctrine to our attention. I'm not introducing anything new there. I'm only taking that back to ancient Rome and seeing how that they had those policies originated with ancient Rome through the cult of Venus. And this would be worthy of our review when we consider the 10 risks that G0 has given us for 2026. Because one of those risks is not the Monroe Doctrine, but the Ezekiel said the Donroe Doctrine. So review Manifest Destiny, Monroe Doctrine, so you can understand the Donroe Doctrine. So let's go back to Revelation 12. And we'll draw our woman. So standing on the moon, clothed with the sun, and we see 12 stars on the crown. And we mark that when? Put it on a line. 4 BC. Can you see? So we've analysed our symbols. Woman is a church. Moon is the old dispensation, the Old Testament. The sun is the gospel, full light of the gospel. And what does 12 stars represent? Complete organization. The number 12 in Bible numerics, the difference between numerics and numerology. We're not numerologists, but we do study numbers. Just like there's a difference between astronomy and astrology. There's a difference between numerics and numerology. And the number 12 is perfect government. So does anybody see a problem with this image? What's wrong? How perfectly organized was this church in 4 BC? Just got a baby king. If you were to say those 12 stars were 12 disciples, they're only toddlers or teenagers. So how do we explain this complete government in 4 BC? I'm not going to explain it. I'm going to let Uriah Smith explain it. And we'll go to Daniel and Revelation. $1897. Uriah Smith, Daniel and Revelation, 546.1. The dragon drew the third part of the stars from heaven. And we've already identified those stars in 63 BC. They can't just be random stars out there in the universe. They were attached to something. And so we've recognized the phase of the church before, the phase of the Old Testament church before it becomes the New Testament church. Oh, sorry, I've got the wrong paragraph. 545.3, my bad. Just double check, 545.3. So what Uriah Smith is going to do here is highlight that this is a change of dispensation. The old Mosaic dispensation has ended and the new dispensation has begun. So type will meet antitype. The woman, the church, had the moon under the feet. And is clothed with the light of the gospel sun, which had just risen. The church is represented as fully organized with its 12 apostles. Before the man-child has appeared on the scene. And he's going to explain this by the word prolepsis. By the figure of the prolepsis, this can be explained. This is easily accounted for by the fact that Christ would commence his ministry and be more connected with this church than he has with former dispensations. He says no violence is done to the correct interpretation of this symbol. And what a prolepsis is, it's when you represent future events as if they're already happened. I'll give you an example of a prolepsis. If I was to say, he was a dead man walking, you can see it's a figure of speech. Is the man dead? But he's as good as dead. So just like we can have prolepsises in our figures of speech, you can have a prolepsis in a symbol. A symbol is not a figure of speech, it's like a figure of an illustration. So the church is seen as fully organized, even though we're not going to see the disciples for another 30 odd years. And that helps us to understand the difference between an institution and individuals. That this is about, Ephesus is about a movement, not individuals. So for BC, we know this is Ephesus. It's a line of success. But Revelation 12 is going to explain that this woman is going to have another experience. What's this woman going to go through? Going to have to hide. It's going to go through the wilderness experience. Because this dragon power has two phases. It's going to literally tread down the city and the sanctuary. Pagan Rome's going to do that. But what's spiritual Rome going to do? Spiritually tread down this city and sanctuary. And what this woman represents is the city and the sanctuary. Remember, the sanctuary is what contains all the core beliefs, all the ideology, the plan of salvation. That's the moon and the sun. We don't do away with the moon. The moon's reflected light, but it's still light. And we don't reject light. But it's also the city. It's that organization that is going to protect and defend that ideology. So when we go to Revelation 17, it's going to break apart that idea of city and sanctuary. We're going to see them in two sections, two entities. But in Revelation 12, we see both the woman and the dragon, that's their entirety. That's why when we see the dragon, we don't see a woman riding that dragon. That'll be taken apart in Revelation 17, so we can see more detail. But in Revelation 12, it's the whole kit and caboodle. It's the whole thing. So that city and sanctuary, that woman is going to get trodden down during 1260 years. Until when? 1798. And then the woman's going to come out of that hiding, out of that cave. So to save time, let's not think of 1260 years. Let's think of 126 years. Where that experience was repeated. And let's call 4 BC what? 1989. Oh, can I get all that back? Can't, can I? Excuse me. Oh, magic. That's why we keep him. Okay, so where was I? 4 BC, we're going to compare to 1989. Lost my train of thought. Where the church has gone through a wilderness experience of 126 years. And what is the church going to look like? We don't call it a church, we call it a movement. Fully formed. Organized for what purpose? To protect and defend that ideology, that plan of salvation. That moon is not just Old Testament dispensation now. That moon also includes Millerite history. All that list that Elder Parminder put down this morning, is that clicking? I can see some heads nodding. For the beginning, we're receiving the full light of the gospel like the church has never received before. And the purpose of the movement is to defend and protect it. But what's the problem? There's a dragon. What do we call the dragon? From Revelation 17, what are we going to call the dragon? There's a seventh kingdom. And that seventh kingdom wants to devour our ideology. And we need to think hard how it's going about doing that. There are no physical battles. They're not threatening us with fines or jail. But they are exerting an influence to us through a war of information. We might think, oh, we can recognize MAGA. But MAGA has some subtleties that can really draw us away from our core beliefs. we might laugh at RFK and his maha. But they have thoughts and beliefs that can draw us away from our core beliefs. So just as the dragon was a very real threat to Ephesus, the dragon is a very real threat to this movement. And we know Ephesus was a history of success. We will be a history of success. But when we say we, we're talking about an institution, a movement. This movement will not budge on its core principles. Even though as individuals we might. So what is the city that is going to protect those beliefs? What do we see in the symbol? It's the organization of those, that's the stars. Those stars aren't individuals. But it's the organization that we have to trust to defend. So as I bring this to a close, one of the main objectives I had in looking in Revelation 12 is to revise the power of a symbol and how they can tell us, we can gain so much information from a simple symbol. And I really shouldn't call this symbol simple, because we know that it has aspects that take us back in history. And also set us up to understand the future of its history. That we can't just limit this symbol to 4 BC. And Uriah Smith's explanation of the prolepsis not only helps us to understand Revelation 1 to 4, but I would suggest helps us also to understand Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurgis. That is another symbol, a symbol of a man that takes in more history than just July 18. So I'll leave you with that thought and we'll close in prayer. Our loving God in heaven, we want to thank you for all the light that has gone before us. We know that we as a movement are standing on a firm foundation. Not only our biblical heritage, the the work of the pioneers and Ellen White, but also the light that came to us from 1989 and Elder Jeff. And we have nothing to fear for the future unless we forget that. You have led and guided us thus far. Help us to fully appreciate and understand the increase in light that we have. But more than that, make us wise to understand the work of the seventh kingdom. Not only as they affect external events, but as their influence can, as they can also have an influence as us individuals. But we do trust in this institution that you have raised. And we pray that you would help us to do our part. Bless these people as we finish this camp meeting. As we tie up some loose ends. And by your grace, we leave in greater unity than when we started. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you to all the translators. Thank you, all the work that's been going on behind the scenes. I know it's difficult hours for you. So God bless. Thank you.